Well, here we are, folks. Another Tuesday evening and another important conversation. Got Leith queued up, ready to come in. I'll just put the pre-show on for a second. Hope everybody's well. Hope you've not been inundated with the floods up in Queensland. I think it's particularly bad at the moment, so my thoughts are with them. And we're going to have an interesting conversation this evening. A lot of economic momentum, moving in all sorts of different directions, conflicting signals and who knows what's going to happen next. So here we go. Just before we do that, of course, we'll just remind you about the doggies there. Oh dear, Luna's sort of bunched up. Meteor's sort of half out of her bed, so we'll just change the camera view. There you go. So Meteor's the one on the left, Luna the one on the right. Looking pretty relaxed. I took them out for a long walk this morning before the show. Lovely morning here, actually. 10 degrees and middle of winter. It's amazing. So it's quite warm. And just to give you a bit of a view of the studio, Leith queued up ready to come in over there. And of course, we've got the chat up the top there. We've got the control panel here. We've got the multi-view here. And just over here, screen you can't really see. That's where I'm actually doing the streaming and stream control. So it's all pretty much set up, ready to go. And it'll be, I think, an interesting conversation. As always with Leith, he never pulls his punches, of course, which is great, which is why I like to have him back on. And he's very willing to give me some time, despite the fact he's becoming more and more immediate-tart, I think. But anyway, great to see he's still happy to come on DFA. Right, I'm going to take the pre-show off. I'm going to start start the show, and I'll be back in just a second. Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream on the 30th of January 2024. It's Martin North here from Digital Finance Analytics. Great to have you on this evening. We're going to have a very important conversation about the current economic trends, what's going on and what might play out in the weeks and months ahead. Of course, a lot of data flowing now after the hiatus over the summer. So it'll be interesting to get Leith's take on what's going on. Just before I bring him in, let me remind you, as I always do, that we're not providing specific financial or legal advice. It's a general conversation only. We do moderate the chat, but feel free to throw your comments in. And if you've got questions, remember to throw those in too. We can certainly take your questions and try and give you an answer. As at the 30th of January 24, if you're watching in replay, if you would like to ask a question, use @WalkTheWorld. That'll make sure it comes into my queue so I see it, because there's always plenty going on in the chat and I don't necessarily always see everything that's being discussed. So if you use @WalkTheWorld, then I'll see it. And also I've enabled Super Chat, which means you can get your question top of the list. Or indeed, if you'd like to make a contribution to what we do around here, always greatly appreciated. We do this not for profit because we think it's a really important conversation to have. So your support is greatly appreciated. Right, let me bring Leith straight in. Leith, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Martin. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me on again.
Great to have you back on, Leith. And I see a slightly different locale this time.
That's right, mate. I'm out in the man cave. So basically, I decided I'm going to change my location because, I always try and do these things inside the house, which during the middle of winter is fine because the kids tend to go a bit early. But I've got like a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they tend to start a little bit later in summer. And I don't really want to be the sort of guy who says, "Look, shut up, I'm on the air." So I just let them do what they've got to do inside the house. I'm at the back, a bit like a little granny flat, but no toilet or anything, just basically my man cave. As you can probably tell by the poster in the background, I'm a child of the 90s. Pearl Jam's my favourite band. And let's go.
Yeah. I was going to comment on the poster. You beat me to it. Excellent. Well, now, of course, it's been summer, so presumably you've been, around and about and away. But as you've come back and as you're starting to get flows of data now, first of all, what's your top level take? The expectation, I think, was late last year. The RBA is going to cut quickly. Inflation is going to get tamed. We're not going to see a recession. I feel that things have moved a bit since then.
Yeah, look, I mean, my view late last year was they're probably going to cut in the second half. I still think they will. I think they'll probably cut, but probably towards later in the second half. But who the hell knows? I think there were some forecasts. Some people were saying they might do it in the first half or in the first quarter, even, which I think was a bit nuts. But look, I think the inflation data has been it's coming down everywhere. It's definitely coming down, and this is basically it's more the good side. So effectively, over the pandemic, we had a lot of supply constraints and what have you, and a lot of factories shut down because of lockdowns and that sort of stuff, and that basically led to all these supply shortages, which initially is what pushed up inflation. And then obviously the government's rolled out the stimulus and all that sort of stuff, which added to demand. And And then the inflation kind of morphed into services, which is the stickier part. But we're sort of getting a reversal of what happened over the pandemic, where the supply side on anything that basically comes in off a boat is falling in price. I'm actually getting goods deflation, in a lot of areas. So that's helping to pull down inflation. That's kind of happening pretty much across the board. Still got the services inflation, the domestic inflation is still stickier. And, in Australia, you see that most notably with the housing side, rents and, housing construction costs and, property insurance now is like, one of the massive things is rising. So, it's still got further to go, but I think the direction pretty much everywhere is now inflation's coming down, and it's actually coming down faster than a lot of the central banks thought. So, like, the US had a pretty soft inflation print. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand had a print late last week, which was basically below their expectations. Looks like the RBA's inflation's, the quarterly gets released tomorrow, but based on the monthly data, everything looks like it's even falling a little bit faster than what the RBA thought. So, the signs are pretty good. Still all these risks. There's all that Houthi rebels are, smashing supply convoys in the Middle East and whatever. I don't know. Look, I think that's probably more noise than anything, but it could be wrong. It could end up being a problem, but it's probably a rounding error right now. So hopefully we're sort of at the back of this. The inflation dragon's slowly getting slayed as economies, basically in their versions of per capita recessions, and demand's weak. And we're starting to get the inflation coming down, so hopefully that'll continue. And hopefully, if you're one of the third of Australians roughly who's carrying a mortgage, you might get some relief later in the year, because it's about bloody time. I mean, households are getting smashed, rents, mortgages, and taxes at the moment. So, and also just general cost of living. We had energy price inflation, all the other stuff. So it's been a pretty crappy couple of years. If you're not one of the lucky third who owns their homes outright and doesn't rent and has obviously cash in bank, who's had their interest income go up. So, for everyone else, it's been pretty crappy.
Yeah, and just a few data points there. Of course, one of the observations is that the supply of rental property continues to drop. And of course, we've had the new influx of students coming in. It might be slightly lower than last time around, but there's still, significant demand for rental property. And more broadly, the inflation parameters that we have in Australia have a smaller element of housing relative to some other countries, which I've always thought weird, bearing in mind that housing is the thing in Australia. So we seem to have a CPI metric that is sort of a little bit myopic when it comes to the impact of housing. Yeah,
and look, I mean, the fact that rents is only 6% of the CPI basket pretty much tells you all. We've got about a third of households rent. I think it's just over a third actually, but roughly a third rent. And they've seen their rents go up by 30-odd% since in the past several years. Since the pandemic, basically. Yet we've got the CPI measure of rent is lagged because it takes a while. CPI measures overall rents, whereas asking rents are on new rentals that come on. So it takes a while for them to feed in. But even when they do feed in, it's still only 6% of the CPI basket, which just on the face of it seems too low to me. And overall housing counts for about 22.5% on about 22% of the CPI basket. So that's rents plus, the cost of building a home, insurances, all that sort of thing, property rates, all those sorts of things. So in total, it's nearly a quarter, but not quite, or just over a fifth, between a fifth and a quarter of the CPI basket. In some other countries, it's actually a lot higher. So the rent component, which is only 6%, is a bit weird. And I think when the CPI, when the ABS actually updates their CPI inflation, so CPI basket to reflect the new weights, I think they'll actually end up upgrading it, because that 6% is based on sort of pre-pandemic rental costs. And now obviously rents are taking up a higher share of household incomes. So I think those weights might go up to 8% or something. I'm just guessing. So I think that's, they update the CPI basket periodically. And I think next time they're actually going to increase the weight of rents, which will then would increase the CPI, other things equal, given that we've got high rental inflation.
Yes, and in fact, they did a little bit of tweaking some time ago and reduced the housing component on the argument that more people were flying and traveling, and therefore the overseas travel costs, etc., should have a bigger proportion. Which I always thought, well, I wonder what proportion of Australians actually are flying, versus renting.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially it's so backward looking that it's the economy we don't have now. So that's it's based on yesteryear, not what the situation is now, which is kind of ridiculous. So, and obviously we've got more and more people renting every year. And, so, I mean, the whole thing's weird. And it's a reason why CPI as a cost of living measure is pretty crappy. So if you actually look at so the ABS does a separate quarterly measure, which is called the living cost indices. And that basically breaks up households into different groups. So you got employee households, which is the majority. Then you got pensioners and some other, groups. The employee household component, their cost of living went up, I think it was 9%, or just over 9% in the year to September. So that was against a CPI increase of, I'm just testing my memory here, but around 5.5%, or closer to 6%. So the reason for that is because obviously employer households, pay mortgages and they pay rents. And those two things are, mortgage repayments are excluded from the CPI basket, and rents are, I'd argue, underweighted. And so the actual, when you measure things that actual employer households pay, which is mortgages and rents and all the other stuff, the cost of living has gone up a lot more than the inflation rate. By contrast, if you're an older Australian who owns your home outright and doesn't have to pay mortgage rates or rents, your cost of living is less than the inflation rate, more than likely. So, there's it all depends on your personal circumstances.
Yeah, of course, it's very important to understand that the CPI is a very rough estimate. Interestingly, in the UK, they actually have CPIH, which includes the housing component as another metric. But what they do is they cherry pick which CPI metric they use based on whether they're trying to actually, keep the contained CPI rate as low as possible for sort of uplifting pensions and things, or whether it's other ones for other purposes. So it's like, we'll have a number for each thing we ever want to do.
Chicken and stats, they call that, if you're a fan of The Wire, So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the other thing, of course, is, you mentioned some of those externalities. It's worth reflecting. Oil prices are now up at over 80 US and continuing to rise a little bit. Some people are now saying, well, maybe we'll see them rise up to 100. And the shipping costs have gone up about 4 times from where they were at their low point. And that's because ships are out of position. They're taking longer to get from A to B because they can't go through the Suez. And by the way, the Panama is also struggling with capacity because of the lack of water. So that means that some of the goods
never ends, does it? Never ends.
There's always more to sort of to factor in. So
there's always a fly in the ointment somewhere.
Well, I guess it sort of indicates some of the sort of the externalities and uncertainties, and obviously we've got the conflict in and around the Middle East, which seems to be going a bad way, and elsewhere too. So I guess the question is, are those externalities, as you said, doesn't really move the needle yet? I've seen a few people suggest, well, they could, yeah, and so. If I was a central banker and I was thinking about, tackling inflation, they tend to look just at what's happened. But should they also be taking account of what might happen as well?
Yeah, they should. But at the same time, I suppose they can. The problem with doing that is they could easily be wrong as well. So I think they need to follow the data first and foremost. And if they try and speculate that this could happen and doesn't happen, well, then they create problems for themselves there. So, we saw that pretty much the whole last decade, where the central banks kept on predicting that wages were going to, rocket. We saw how wrong their wage inflation forecasts were for a decade. Remember that funny hockey stick where they got like the wage forecast is here and the next year is here and it's going to keep doing this, and but actual wages kept going like that. So they always run the risk of that. We'll see how it plays out. I mean, I'm still hopeful that that inflation, continues to moderate and sort of, gradually returns back to their target. But we could just as easily say. I mean, I think we are sort of in a kind of period of stagflation anyway. We've got piss poor growth. Let's face it. Yep. if you take our population growth, we're in a per capita recession. We have been for 3 quarters straight. Canada's the same. Canada's in a deep per capita recession. New Zealand, various other countries elsewhere. Yet they got this highish inflation. So it's kind of, we are already in a sort of effective stagflationary period. And also low productivity growth pretty much everywhere as well, which is, a sign of stagflation. So, we have got it's not saying it's as bad as 1970s stagflation, but we do have a moderate version of, a form of stagflation at the moment. So, and I said, I remember I wrote a piece before COVID hit, that I wrote a Christmas report, special report. Maybe it was just the first year of COVID. I can't remember. I think it was 2019, actually, December 2019, saying that Australia is, because we're finishing that decade. And I said Australia risks another lost decade. No, sorry, it must have been the first year of COVID. The reason why was at the time we had negative net overseas migration. I said if the federal government goes back to its same policy of just juicing population growth, we're going to have another lost decade. Because, which is basically we have really poor per capita GDP growth where it's almost, close to zero. You have very, very poor income growth close to zero, which is what we had pretty much last decade. And I basically said I think it was called sowing the seeds of another lost decade. And unfortunately, 3 or 4 years later, or whatever it is, it looks like we're doing exactly that. And if anything, this decade shaped up to worse than the last decade, which sucked, which at MacroBusiness we called a lost decade. Mm-hmm. So, it's just another, looks like it's shaping up to be another decade where we get headline growth just because we're bringing in tons of people. But per capita outcomes keep going backwards once you adjust for all the quality of life indicators. And that's pretty much, we're repeating the similar mistakes to what we did last decade. Obviously the circumstances are slightly different, but the broad macro drivers or the policies that the federal government's pursuing are very similar. Just bring in tons of people, generate top line growth, don't build enough houses, don't build enough infrastructure, really poor productivity, and just watch living standards slide backwards. And, really poor wage growth as well, income growth. And that's effectively what we got. So, hooroo.
Well, yes. And, this has been a long-term set of trends, right? So effectively we pile more people in, makes the top line number look okay-ish, not great, but okay-ish. I guess the other externality we should talk about is what's happened up in China with regards to the collapse of you-know-who, finally, after 2 years. And the implications of that could be quite significant too in terms of steel demand and all those sorts of things. Because, of course, if you think of the Australian economy, we always say houses and holes, right? Well, houses is the big thing, but also D'ing stuff up and chucking it overseas is the other big thing. A lot of that's going to China. If, in fact, demand for steel continues to perhaps ease back, that could have a big impact on the revenue line of the Australian economy as well. So even if they continue to pump the population, which means per capita growth goes backwards, top line growth is also at risk potentially.
Yeah, and obviously, if China's demand for steel, basically for iron ore and coking coal, effectively, which is steel demand, falls because they're obviously not building as much stuff. And let's face it, China's economy has been, Jim Chenos called, I think, all the way back in 2008. He basically said this is unsustainable. But obviously, you can, they've run it for another 15 years since then. I think it was 2008, roughly around that time. Jim Chenos came out saying China's building empty cities and it's got this really, poor, growth model, which is just unsustainable. Well, nearly, 15 years later, it looks like it's finally might be coming a cropper. Like they're probably going to keep trying to keep it going for longer because that's what they do. But ultimately, this was always going to happen at some point where their demand for just building stuff for the sake of building stuff to keep the economy going was always going to fail at some point, or at least slow down. And then once that happens, Australia was always in the sights because we're a massive iron ore and coking coal supply to China. We're their biggest. And obviously if their demand falls, well, then those prices fall in the global market. And Rio, BHP and all the Fortescue, et cetera, all take a hit. And, that means less budget revenue for the federal government as well, because through company taxes, even though we don't tax that stuff nearly enough, we still do get tax, fair bit of tax from it just through corporate taxes. So, that'll filter through. And of course, Australia runs the dumbest economic model ever. We just why resource-rich countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand run high population. Well, sorry, New Zealand's not resource-rich, but they're, a primary producer. But yeah, I should say Canada and Australia run high immigration programs is beyond me. Both nations sit on masses of mineral wealth, which is basically one of the primary reasons why both countries are rich. And yet we run policies that deliberately dilute that wealth amongst more people. At the same time, we don't tax those things properly. So the people that live here don't get enough of the benefit from it. So, you can't think of a worse economic model. Can you imagine Norway was doing this stuff? Like, they weren't taxing their resources, and they were, pumping their population so that those resources got spread more thinner. It's madness, but that's what we do. And I think I bring this up just about every time on this show, Martin. And there you go. That's my little rant on that topic for today. I can keep going, but
no.
There's a little bit.
We are on the same page here. It's a really dumb strategy. And if you compare Norway, of course, they just announced that their that investment fund which they built years ago. Yeah, and they're now investing big in AI, and they've got increased the holdings of Microsoft, etc. And it's huge.
No, it's like worth. I think it's $2 trillion. It's about $300,000 per citizen. I tried to do the calc. Unfortunately, I think that's right, because when I was trying to do I put in my calculator, and it's like, how do you even put $2 trillion into a calculator? I was trying to count the zeros. I'm like, hang on, is it 9, 10? I couldn't work out any zeros, but I'm pretty sure it's about $300,000 per resident in Norway. They've got about 5 million people, well, 5.6, I think. So it turns out to be about 300,000, I'm pretty sure, dollars per citizen, that sovereign wealth fund. And they're smart in that they don't invest it domestically, because if they did that, if they invested that domestically, that'd pump up their exchange rate, and that'd make them uncompetitive and to sell. So instead they invested all offshore, which keeps their exchange rate lower, and then that makes them more competitive as well. So they're smart. They've done the right thing, and they don't. Norway's population has grown by about 25% since 1960. Ours has grown by 170. So it's just moronic. And the viewers probably may or may not know that Australia's population ticked over to 27 million last week, according to the ABS's population clock. Now, what that means is that this century, the population's grown by 8.1 million people in just 23 years. 19 years early. 19 years early compared with...
No,
it's more than that. It's I think we hit 27 million. It's like 30 odd years early.
Yeah.
Based on the... so in 2002, the first inaugural intergenerational report was released. And that tipped that... Australia wouldn't hit 25 million for, when was it? It's like, it's decades away from now. That's 25 million, let alone 27. And that was based on net overseas migration of projected of 90,000 per year, which was basically the historical average up to that point. And then the Howard government started this rot, because he held a massive, parliamentary inquiry into Australia's skills. And that basically the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the Australian Industry Group all attended, and they basically said, we've got massive skills shortages in Australia and we need to solve them. And one of the ways to solve them is we need more immigration. So the Howard government obliged, thanks to, my mate Abel Rizvi, who devised this stupid program that we've got. And he basically, he ramped immigration. And in the 15 years leading up to COVID, we went from 90,000, what was the projection, and sort of the historical average, up to 220 for that 15 years. And then obviously the pandemic hit, and now we had 518,000 last year. So, because we had to make up that lost migration, Martin, we had to make up, we couldn't possibly have, slower migration for a few years, because 220 suddenly became the figure we had to meet no matter what. And now the intergenerational report tips 235,000 forever, and a population going to 40,000. 40 and a half million by 2062-3. So It's crazy. This is what we've done. It's been deliberate. And 8.1 million people in this century alone. And that's why we've got a rental crisis. That's why we don't have enough infrastructure. That's why it's one of the reasons why our water supplies are structurally, undersupplied because, effectively we've got 8.1 million mouths that need water and all the other stuff that goes with it. It's just crazy. And then this whole, don't give me this net zero stuff. Like, how are we going to meet that with this population growth? It doesn't seem possible to me. If you grow your number of consumers, you're going to have more energy users and you're going to use more energy and you're going to have more emissions. Like, it's just logic. So anyway, I pretty much get in this topic every time I come on the show. I can't help it, guys. I'm sorry.
Well, it's because it's absolutely a centre point, isn't it, of the whole Australian story, which is, well, how do you grow the economy? Well, you just bring more people in, et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting that Robbie Barwick made a comment while you were talking about China and said, the empty cities are now full and the Chinese government did what the Australian government would never do, which is to deliberately take steps to deflate the property market. So that's an interesting property bubble, he called it. Now, that's an interesting observation. Certainly in Australia, the last thing that anybody wants to do is to actually allow property prices to fall.
Well, yeah, so China's done the old build it and they'll come approach. We do the let them come and then don't build it. So, and my mates at the Grattan Institute, the immigration shules over there, sponsored by Peter Scanlon. They did an article. I haven't written it up yet. I'm going to do it for tomorrow. But they wrote an article in The Conversation saying, the solution to the housing shortage is to bring in migrant construction workers now. It's like, bloody hell.
Recursive.
Yeah. It's like, okay, we need migrants to build houses for migrants. Yeah. Good one, guys. Yeah. Like they can never admit that they're wrong and that the system doesn't work. The solution to the problem is always the thing that's caused the problem. They just cannot. It just does my head in. But anyway, that's the way it goes. It's not going to change. The system's not going to change. I wish it would, but I can't see it changing.
Well, and that is really the point that there is a long story here, right, of continued policy in a particular direction, either side of politics. So it doesn't matter who's in, right? It's the same. And, I think we've discussed before about the way that Treasury thinks about all of this and the fact that Treasury often calls the shots, whoever is in power, when it comes to some of these policy metrics, because, of course, they're measuring top-line GDP growth. And, get you more people, you get more GDP, but it doesn't actually make life better for anybody, nor does it actually really take the economy to where it needs to be. Reduces manufacturing. We're still seeing that at the moment, less manufacturing than ever before. And, you've got to ask the question then, it is a self-replicating thing that says build more property, bring more people in, build more property. That's it.
No, but you're missing a key ingredient, selling coffees as well.
I forgot that one. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you got to sell them coffees too, because you got to have heaps more cafes because you don't have enough of them. I'm telling you, so I live in a suburb called Ashburton, really nice suburb, Melbourne. And we've got a local strip shops called High Street, which is, it's one of the few places in Melbourne that has a proper old-fashioned strip shop. Like, it's really good. And probably, but you go down there now. So when I moved here in 2006, there was like maybe 3 cafes in the whole strip. Now I reckon there's at least 15. There might be 20. Like, it's just insane. It's like, and most of them are empty. There's a couple that always, outperform, and they're the cool places, right? Which most dorks go to. I don't buy coffee out if I can afford it because I think it's a ripoff. But but they're the ones that most of the cats go to, and the rest of them are just basically struggle to get by. And it's like, why do we need a dozen, maybe 15 coffee shops in the strip? And then it's the same with personal training studios. So it's like there's there's one here. Half of them shut down, then another one opens up, and then they shut down because they can't make money. And then the biggest one in the last, and I still don't understand this economy. I reckon it's money laundering and other nefarious things. We've got now massage parlors. Like every strip shop in Melbourne now is probably 3 of those. And you're going, who the hell goes to these things? But yeah, it's just, is that what you want to build your economy on? Is all this stuff, which everyone who works in those things struggle to make ends meet. And shouldn't they be doing something else? Like, shouldn't we be doing something productive instead of just having all these, I'm not having to go to someone who runs a cafe. Like, it'd be hard work and everything. But I'm just saying, why do you need 12 of them? Like, wouldn't we be better off having 4 cafes that are all healthy and make a profit rather than 12 where you got 2 that do okay and the rest struggle? But that's, pretty much the Melbourne economy. It's just, it's just based on bringing in people and more volume and more meat for the grinder. That's kind of the economy down here. We don't really have a real economy. And then we've got a massive bloated public service as well, which, just is highly inefficient. And we can't build any bloody infrastructure for a decent price because we've got all the, all the cronies in on that as well. So it's just, it makes you a little bit negative, a bit pessimistic about the future, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and I guess, you could think about it in the old theory of the economy is you have, the dollar that goes around the system, right? So effectively, if you have, that same dollar going around the system, but it's not multiplying, it's just the same dollar going around the system. That's one of the reasons why productivity is so limited. And of course, the other factor is we've got a lot of people working in the caring sector, which is a critical sector. But again, that doesn't actually necessarily create more momentum in the economy. So if you look at the growth engine in the economy, it's getting narrower and narrower and spluttering along.
And it's not just us, Martin. It's so there's it's been really good. So I think Canadians are a bit more honest than us in a lot of ways. Look, I don't know. I've met Canadians, obviously. I've never been over there, but I do read their press a bit like I follow New Zealand. And their bank economists now and other economists are now pushing back hard against their government's extreme immigration. So, if you think Australia's immigration's high, Canada says, hold my beer. And if you don't, actually, I've actually got the article I put up today. I might share my screen just to give I haven't got it on a slide. I've got it on my article, but it basically tells the story, if that's all right. I might share my screen.
Yeah, share your screen. That should be fine.
Where is it? Here we go. So this is one I wrote today. So this is Australia's immigration. We all know it. Record 500 and nearly 20,000 people last financial year. Off the charts. Never seen it anywhere near it before. Unbelievable. That's obviously, it's actually worse than this, but I'll just grab Shane Oliver's chart because it has vacancy rate and rents on one chart. I don't know where he's got the data from, but you get the idea. Population skyrocketed, rents are skyrocketed, vacancy rates down. Usual story. And in Australia, we've got per capita recession where GDP per capita is lower than it was, in 2021, effectively. And while aggregate GDP has grown because we've had this, we've got massive population growth. But, per capita, we're bad. Now, this is Canada. So this is from the National Bank of Canada. These guys wrote this fantastic report earlier in the month saying that Canada's trapped in a population trap that it's basically cannot get out of because its population is growing too faster than business investment, housing, infrastructure, and they're getting effectively what's called capital shallowing, which is when basically you spread all those 3 things across more people, you get lower productivity and lower living standards. Exactly what we've got in Australia. And here's a classic chart where basically Canada's had this unbelievable population boom that added 1.2 million people versus our 620 last year. So basically double ours. And they're not double the size. They're about 40 million people versus our 27. But yeah, similar kind of magnitudes. And CPI rents rocketed. So our CPI rent actually looks pretty similar to that because ours has rocketed as well and still catching up to asking rents. And then the housing supply, shock horror, massive supply deficit because the housing hasn't kept up, right? So surprise, surprise, housing shortage, massive rental growth, just like Australia. Living standards at a standstill. That's Canadian GDP per capita. Absolutely shit house. Sorry, I shouldn't swear in this program. Absolutely terrible versus US. This is the key one. This is basically the whole thing. This is their capital shallowing. So this is their real capital stock per person collapsed because basically the number of people they've got is growing faster than their business investment, infrastructure, housing, etc. So they're getting capital shallowing. So Canada's productivity sucks, just like ours, which is one of the reasons why their GDP per capita is crashing. And then this is their non-residential capital stock per capita. So it's gone from here 2014 to here. It's falling. And then Gerard Minack, who's a gun economist in Australia, he put out a report about a month ago, November actually, where he basically it was basically a mirror image of this report, but on Australia. And this is his chart of Australia's capital shallowing, so capital stock per person crashed, just as GDP per hour works crashed as well. So we've got similar economies here where basically both governments, Trudeau, Albo here, but also it started before Albo. Let's face it, this has been going on for years. They're just running this population Ponzi economy where the whole thing is just bring people in and then don't worry about it, but let everything else rip and suffer. So let business investment not keep up. Let housing not keep up. Let infrastructure not keep up. And what it basically means is you end up with falling productivity and falling capital shallow, because you get capital shallowing, you got less of that stuff to spread around. And then you end up with lower living standards and obviously higher rents and all this other stuff. And this is Gerard Minack's conclusion basically after that chart, where he says basically Australia's economic performance. This is why I used the lost decade meme. Like I was saying this, well before he wrote this report, but that last decade was basically a lost decade for Australia. And he just said basically it was before the pandemic, it was the worst in 60 years. Per capita GDP growth was low, productivity growth tepid, real wages were just stagnant, and housing increasingly unaffordable. And according to him, this is Gerard Minack, there were many reasons for the mess, but the most important was a giant capital to labour switch. Australia relied on increasing labour supply rather than increasing investment to drive growth. And he said it was basically a demonstrable failure in the 15 years that led up to the pandemic. And remarkably, the country is doubling down on that same strategy. And the result's going to be just as poor, if not worse. This is everything I've been saying for 10 years of MacroBusiness and ignored by, not by viewers here, but, ignored by the mainstream. I'm starting to get my comeuppance now because I'm now getting called on the radio and everything else.
Yeah.
So I'm now doing all that, I'm getting to, they're all sort of taking notice now, which is great. But, this is just, it's great to actually have another economist come out independently and come up with the same conclusions that I've had for years. And, you sort of feel like, oh, good, I'm not the only one who thinks this stuff. But this is a highly, highly, highly damaging, growth model that we're running. And Canada, and for Canada as well, it's highly damaging for them too. It's absolutely ridiculous. But we've got these nutters in government that are prepared to continue doing it, and we get gaslighted by politicians who seem to say that it's the solution to the problem rather than the creation of the problem.
And if you add on to that, KPMG came out and said, no, we just got to keep growing, right? And then when you actually think about it, well, who does it benefit? It benefits the banks because they can lend more. It benefits the big construction companies because they can build more. The retailers can sell more. So actually, big Australia, from a corporate perspective, sponsors and wants this perpetual population growth. But it's unsustainable.
100%. Look, it's it's the same old story. The growth lobby loves it. They make more, more customers to sell to. If you're high-rise Harry Triggerboff, who's who makes your money selling apartments and land banking, and then watching the land values go up, banking apartments and banking land, you love population growth. That's why he was saying Australia should be 100 million people, because it benefits you. Same if you're a bank. If you're a bank, you got more people to lend to. Jerry Harvey used to pump Big Australia as well. He loves it because more people means more customers to sell, goods to, his household appliances and everything. So for them, it's a win-win. It also means they can, keep downward pressure on wages in some areas because they've always got this endless, contestable labour market where they can just bring people in overseas. And, and they don't have to train people here. Like, why would you bother training a local when you can just go and bring in a migrant? And it's not the sole cause of our problem. Of course it's not. And people sort of think, oh, well, you're a one-trick pony, Leith, because that's all you ever talk about. It's like, no, I talk about it because no one else talks about it. I don't need to talk about things that we all know is wrong. But this is one thing where there's so many shills pushing for it that there needs to be a voice pushing against it. And I'm the antidote to that. So there you go. That's why I do it. But, it's just crazy. And look, we've seen this sort of per capita recession bear out. Can I share the screen again, Martin? I'll just, I've got some other charts I've done. You've had, Tarek Brooker always gives charts. I need to at least do likewise to keep up. So I don't need to go through migration numbers. We've already done that. How do I get down to the next slide? So it's got a little bit of lag here. Sorry.
That's right.
So sorry about this. It's a little bit laggy.
Just shout out to Tony Lacandro, who's just dropped in. Hi, Tony. Good to see you.
G'day, Tony. How's things? So talking about this, absolute per capita recession or whatever, households getting smashed. Real household disposable income, which is here, has collapsed. It's basically running at levels we have running similar, basically almost the same, like it's slightly rounding error bigger than what it was in 2012. So we've effectively given, or maybe it was 2011, I can't remember, 2011 and 2012, we've basically given up 12 or 13 years of gains in the last, couple of years. So we got all the big boost from the stimulus, and then that's all gone, and we're down to basically 2011 or 12 levels. It's absolutely, and according to Michael Reid at the AFR, this started to September, but he did analysis to June, so the June national accounts. It showed that Australia had the biggest fall in disposable income per capita in the world in the year to June, and obviously real wages have tanked as well. So we're and obviously this chart, which is similar to the other one, shows that we've been in per capita recession for several years. Growing in aggregate because of population growth, but households are getting smashed. So we've basically households lost 6% of their income last year per capita in real terms. But their real spending only fell by 1.8% in the same period. And the reason for that, their real household consumption, the reason for the difference between there is because they drew down the savings. So they basically created the savings rate to the lowest level since the GFC. They're basically drawing down the savings to keep this level higher than it would be given the falling consumption. And today we actually got, nominal retail sales figures for the year to December. And what it showed is that nominal retail sales only grew by 8.8% last calendar year. Now, when you factor in the fact that inflation was about 4.8% or something, 4.6%, according to the monthly CPI indicator, and we had 2.4% population growth, that means we went backwards by about 6%. So real retail sales per capita fell by about 6%, which is similar to what the household disposable income fell by. And all it sort of tells you is that households are getting absolutely smashed, and they're cutting back. And the only thing papering over the economy's cracks is we're adding more households. So the households are cutting back individually, but we're adding more households than households are cutting back, and that's what's keeping this aggregate growth going up. Like that's why the economy's still growing, even though per capita we're not growing. So it's absolutely terrible for living standards. But the government can say, "Hey, look, we're not in recession. We avoided recession," because they're basically running this population Ponzi scheme. And, I don't know about you, but it's not exactly a great model, because politicians should care about living standards. They shouldn't care about what the aggregate GDP is saying. Who cares? Doesn't matter. It's what everyone's slice of the pie is. In fact, it's actually broader than GDP. GDP on its own is not a great measure, but, I'm just saying, like the measures that politicians should look at should be per capita outcomes, not aggregate outcomes, because aggregate means nothing. It's pointless. Like, why do you care if the overall economy grows by X, if it's done that because you've grown the population by X plus, 1, whatever? It doesn't matter. But they're the sort of traitorous leaders that are that lead us, and unfortunately, most of the mainstream media and a lot of economists in the country, worship aggregate GDP rather than per capita and living standards, which is what I focus on and what I care about.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of the mainstream economists also just focus on the GDP number, and like Gerard and yourself and a few others who really call it out as it is. I think another
you sort of say, look, why are we doing this? They look and go, well, what's the point of this? Like, what's the end point for this?
Yeah. Yeah, well, what is the end game? The end game is lower quality of life, less ability for households to spend. Probably you'll see that death rates will continue to sort of drop rather than rise because we can't afford to spend as much as we need on health and everything else. Because, of course, infrastructure includes things like health and education and all those other critical capabilities that are required, but nobody thinks about it. And if you compare that, interesting, if you compare what's going on now with what happened post-war, there was a significant boom in the population then, a significant boom in building, but it was planned and they put the infrastructure in place as well.
Yeah, and they also had, obviously it's a lot easier for somewhere like Canberra to add, X number of people than it is for, say, so basically the smaller you are and you don't have to go as far from the city centre. You can sprawl pretty easily because it's still not that far to the city centre, etc. But as you get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes, untenable, which is effectively what we've got now. And there's some studies out there which basically say that, that the optimal size of, in fact, there's a guy called Peter McDonald who's a demographer, and he used to be really good, and then he turned into immigration shield. But he's from ANU. Anyway, he did make a comment a couple of years back where I think he might be retired now because I haven't heard from him for a few years. He used to be all over it, but he basically said that, once cities get over 5 million people, they tend to, their living standards fall, was basically his general rule of thumb. And, like below 5 millions, they become over their optimal size, generally speaking. And that's basically where Sydney and Melbourne are. I mean, I'd argue they're over their optimal size probably million people ago. But you sort of get the idea, like this perpetual growth thing whereby Sydney and Melbourne are projected to be about 9 or 10 million people by 2060. It's just nuts. When you think that Melbourne at the turn of the century was 3.3 million and Sydney was about 3.7. It's just like, why is that good to effectively triple the size of your cities almost in about 60 years? It just doesn't make sense to me. So, but that's what they do.
Yeah. Right. Some rather naive but simple policy, isn't it? That's the problem. Now, just come back to the retail sales. It's worth just underscoring one other critical thing. Of course, if you look at the value and volume, right, the fact is that because the cost of everything has gone up, people are having to spend more to buy the same things that they bought previously. And I think sometimes the way the ABS reports the numbers, it doesn't make it that absolutely crystal clear about the difference between value and volume over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that monthly retail sales data is just basically the nominal value. So that's obviously impacted by inflation, which has been high, and also population growth. So once you strip those two things out, the sales are really poor. And I mean, as I said, they'd fallen about 6% last calendar year. So it's just another sign of a very, very weak economy where we've got this. It's basically a per capita recession economy. Which is the one we're in. And it looks like this per capita recession is going to last, most of this year at least, because, the Treasury's population growth forecast, and I might just put that on there quickly just to show everyone. It's good. Went straight back to, that's nice. Sorry. Bugger it. I'll go. Some reason it doesn't have the up and down arrows. I don't know what's going on with it.
Okay.
But I'll try it once more. Sorry, guys. As you can see, this is what you call live radio. Live TV.
Live TV. That's okay. Well, I won't cut across until you found the right slide. So just mess around with it, find the right one, and then.
Right, no, it'll just take no time at all. Now that I'm actually here.
It's not a problem.
There we go. Got it. All right.
Okay.
So I can go back to, where's the slide view? Right. you know what the problem is? I'm getting this super lag. So you hit something and then nothing happens, and then
it's in there somewhere.
Oh, well, look, I don't know if I can even get that to. It's not working, but
okay. No
this I'll just keep it. Can you see it?
I can see what you've sent through. Yes, it's not. If you get down to the bottom, can you not press the projection icon down at the bottom of the screen towards the right-hand side? That should come across a bit.
For some reason I'm on it.
Yeah, there. Yeah, if you press that.
Oh, there we go. Cool. Sorry, I'm using that. For some reason, I'm using the web version. I don't know why. I'm on a new laptop, and I obviously must have installed something, but it's gone to the web browser version, not the regular one, which kind of sucks because I hate the web browser version. But anyway, so the net overseas migration forecast. This is released in December on the MyEFO, and basically, so we hit 518,000 last financial year, so 2022-23, and they tipped that this financial year is going to come down to 375,000. So, this is Labor's whole spin. Like, we're cutting immigration, we're going to halve it back to 250 over X number of years, which is still ridiculously high and higher than we had. Higher than the average pre-pandemic. So, we had the 15 years of Big Australia. So, 375 this financial year, according to them, that's still be the second highest level on record in Australia's history, down from last year's. It looks like immigration is actually turning over. So the monthly visa arrivals data, which the ABS publishes separately, but it correlates really strong with net overseas migration. This chart's by Commonwealth Bank, by the way, Gareth Ed. That's started to fall. And the reason why it's falling is because on this chart here, we've got student visa arrivals have started to catch up to departures. So departures have slowed, arrivals have slowed, but departures have caught up. And the reason for that is obviously at the start of the pandemic, departures, heaps of students went home. When the borders reopened, we had a whole bunch arrive, but there was none to go home because they'd already gone home. And then now they're starting to go, now we're starting to get outflows again. And that basically means that this 375,000 target looks projection looks probably, semi-real, fairly likely that that's the sort of number we're going to get. Now, it's important to point out that MyEFO's current forecast is cumulatively, so over their, 6-year forecast or whatever it is, 458,000 higher than what they projected in Labor's October 2022 budget. And after Labor then ramped it up in their May budget last year, it's still 38,000 higher than was forecast in the May federal budget. So the fact of the matter is that, we're still stuck with high immigration. It's way higher than the budget than the government previously thought it was going to be when they decided to, open the borders and basically try and get as many here as possible through all their various, dukes of the system. And that's the primary reason why we've got a obviously rental crisis. But what it also means is that, the population grew by 2.4% in last financial year. It's probably going to come down to, maybe 1.9%, 2%. But it's pretty much all the economic forecasts this year for the economy not to grow by that high, to grow by, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4%, depending on who you are. So what that basically means is we're going to have another year of per capita recession. So we've already had 3 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth in per capita terms, and we're likely to get several more quarters, which means that this will end up being a 1.5 year, maybe 2 year per capita recession, which is, a hell of a long time. And it's it'll definitely be the longest in my lifetime. So that's sort of the crappy economic outlook that we're facing.
And the point here is you got to also think about the distributional impact of this, right? It doesn't mean that everybody is in that boat. What it means is there's actually a distribution element. So there are some who are doing relatively well, who's still getting quite high pay rises. There are others that are going backwards, and they've been going backwards since 2012. And unfortunately, there's quite a high correlation between those with large mortgages and those going backwards over a long period of time, particularly in some of those outer suburban areas. And so what you're starting to see now is a real disparity of growth and income and prosperity in different areas across the country.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said before, and Terry Tarek's used this term as well. I remember him saying, and he's spot on. There's basically 3 Australias right now. So you've got effectively, 1/3 of mortgage. It's not quite 1/3, but close enough. 1/3 of people rent. 1/3 of people, have a mortgage, own occupied mortgage, I should say. And then about 1/3 of people own the homes outright and don't rent and don't have an own occupied mortgage. And those people are basically killing it, creaming it. Whereas the other 2/3, so those who rent and those who have got mortgages, are getting absolutely smashed. And that reminds me, sorry, I got to share screen again. I'm sorry, guys. Got to do it again.
It's all right.
Just on that point. So you might remember this. This is a few months old. This is probably from the. I think this is from the. No, actually, it is the September quarter from the National Accounts, I'm pretty sure, or CBA's own data. What the CBA did was they measured spending per capita, and also they had another one on income per capita, which basically is a mirror image of this. What it basically showed is that this line here was the inflation rate in the September quarter. And what it showed is that older Australians, so those who were age 70 plus, were basically spending more than the inflation rate. So they had real spending. They were showing real spending growth. The younger Australians had outright falls in their spending. Right? That's because they tend to be, the renters and whatever, and or early mortgage holders have big mortgages because they got in the housing market only a few years ago, et cetera, and they're carrying big loans. They're slashing their spending in outright terms, let alone, in real terms. So this is just outright spending cuts versus, and this these middle-aged people who I'm part of is basically spending less than the inflation rate. So they're reducing their spending in real terms, but not in absolute terms. And that's the 3 Australias we've basically got here. Well, it's kind of a form of the 3 Australias. The older Australians killing it. On average, I know there's always people doing hard. For example, if you're a renter and you're old, if you're one of those sort of 25%, you're getting hammered. But on average, the older Australians who own most of the assets, they accumulated most of the savings over the pandemic. They tend to own the homes. Most of them own them outright. They might have an investment property or two with very small mortgage on it, and they're getting the rents on that. They're doing very well. This mob's not doing as, they're doing worse than, they're in a per capita recession, I guess. And this mob are just in an outright bloody, financial disaster zone. And that's effectively the situation we've got with the 3 Australias. And there's massive distributional consequences here because everyone's seen the stage 3 tax cut debate, right? Well, the share of personal income tax, the share of income going in personal income taxes has hit in an all-time high. That's a chart I wish after just coming to this, I should have included in this slide, but I forgot. Always happens. So basically, Australians are paying a record share of their income on income taxes right now. That's 17.4%. And even after the stage 3 tax cuts go through, CBA estimates that in a few years, like 2 years or something, we're going to be paying more than we do now in income tax, even with those tax cuts. And again, this older group here who's absolutely killing it are the ones who generally don't pay income tax. So they're getting a free ride on the tax front. Anyone here who's working is getting absolutely hammered on their personal income taxes, getting hammered on their mortgages, getting hammered on their rents. And then obviously the general cost of living everyone suffers from energy prices, et cetera. But this is where the whole distributional impact is not being shared evenly. So whenever the RBA hikes interest rates, obviously it impacts roughly 1/3 of people with owner-occupied mortgages. They get hammered. We've got a mass population growth, which is pushing up rents, and we've got low housing supply because of various reasons. That's obviously hammering renters, and these guys this mob here are largely insulated. So it's a bit of a crappy situation, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, and it's worth just, I think, sort of thinking about this sort of slightly more broadly, and that is to say that the momentum that we're seeing here and the disparate distribution across different cohorts is likely to stay with us for quite some time, because actually wages growth is coming down a little rather than going up, unless you're in a very specific area. So there isn't a get out of jail card in terms of wages. And the other interesting observation, and I saw this in a report recently, that the banks at the moment are actually under huge margin compression because of the term funding facility going away and because of the international cost of funds much higher than they were. So their ability to be able to pass on rate cuts, even if rates cuts do come, are potentially an issue. So we might not actually see mortgage rates go down. They might rather keep those cheaper rates to attract new borrowers rather than existing borrowers. And then the other interesting observation is the investors who are piling back in at the moment are getting bigger tax breaks because the higher rates mean that they've got bigger tax offsets. So that's costing the Treasury a lot more than previously, right? So there's another factor in the mix as well.
Oh, 100%. And look, unfortunately, the ATO tax statistics take years to come out. They're always like 2 years behind. But I'm looking forward to seeing the tax statistics for this financial year and last one, actually. The last financial year, this financial year, when they come out in a year and then 2 years' time from now. Because they're going to be an absolute, it'll be record negative gearing losses, which the government's going to have to absorb. And, for good reason, despite the fact that rents have gone up a lot, they haven't gone up nearly as much as mortgage repayments have gone up. So mortgage payments are basically double, since the RBA started hiking rates. And so mortgage interest is basically double. And that's the tax deductible bit. Yeah. And that just basically means that, the Australian Treasury is going to be in for some pain. And just to your point on wages, Martin, I'm pretty bearish on wage growth, and there's a pretty good reason for it. And sorry, guys, I've got to do one more. It's just I'll get out of this thing. There we go. I'll just find it. Take me 1 sec. This is what we need. All right. So the labour market, basically, we've had obviously this record population growth, and the civilian population grew by. So this isn't just from immigration. This is from immigration as well as with the civilian working age population. That's basically the population that's aged over 15. Has gone up by more than immigration because Costello's baby bonus kids from the early 2000s are now hitting working age. So they're sort of finishing uni, or finishing school, university, etc. They're hitting the workforce. So we've had this sort of double whammy where we've got mass population growth through immigration, and then we've also got the baby bonus kids now hitting working age. And what that's meant is that the civilian working age population went up by, so this is population age over 15, went up by 643,000, 3% growth. This chart's from Alex Joyner at IFM, and this is based on the monthly labour force data. And so labour supply is growing, nearly twice the rate as it was pre-pandemic. And this SEEK, as a result of that, we've got lower. We've also got obviously slowing economy, so job demand's falling. So according to SEEK, the number of job ads is almost down to its basically pre-pandemic level. It's almost there. It's fallen heavily because job demand's falling. At the same time, the number of applicants per job, and that's basically the combination. At the same time, the number of applicants per job has rocketed, and it's actually running well above pre-pandemic level. And that's because we've got more people, right? So you've got more people coming in looking for jobs. That's driven the number of applicants per job. And the upside to that is that when you plot the ratio of applicants per job ad, which is this line here from SEEK, it correlates. It's been historically a pretty good leading indicator of the unemployment rate. You can see here. And this has spiked. It's gone through the roof. It's running so far above pre-pandemic levels now after rocketing. Combination of falling job demand, rising labour supply. And what that's pointing to is a pretty hefty rise in the unemployment rate. And Australia needs to create, this job's from CBA, this chart's from CBA. Australia needs to create about 35,000 jobs a month just to keep the unemployment rate constant, assuming an unchanged participation rate. That's a really high number of jobs that need to be created. It's historically high. And if we don't do it, unemployment's going to rise, which, based on this data seems inevitable. And when you have rising unemployment, it obviously means wage growth is going to fall because you're going to have more competition for jobs, amongst workers and lower bargaining power. And it means that, an oversupply of workers, and that means that wage growth is going to fall. So I think that's a pretty good reason to be bearish on, bearish on the job market and also bearish on wages. And I'm tipping that the unemployment rate, we're getting pretty close to 5% by the end of the year. Whether it hits that or not, I don't know, but it'll be sort of, up towards that. It's 3.9% currently.
Yeah, and the RBA some time ago said they expected the unemployment rate to rise a little and then sort of
4.5%
backpedal a little bit from that. But the expectation is probably higher unemployment. But of course, the wages growth is the first thing that happens. If you can basically pick from the market, you don't have to offer as much. The other interesting observation, I think it came out quite recently, there was an interesting piece of analysis looking at the average wage of a overseas student working in Australia post versus a local one. And in fact, yeah, right. So there's a big gap there too, isn't it? So
massive.
Another productivity problem.
Yeah, 100%. It's a problem. So basically. So this is from the Graduate Outcome Survey. So the migration review that came out a few months ago, a guy called Tom Clennell at Sky News did a fantastic analysis of it. And he basically he showed that just over half of international student graduates with a bachelor degree who've been here for 3 years are working in unskilled jobs. So it was like 52% or 53%. And what that means is they're working in level 4 or level 5 jobs. So what they basically do is level 1's the high skilled, level 2, 3, 4, 5 is like bartenders, cleaners, waiters, cafes, stuff like that. So over half of our international student graduates who have a bachelor degree, who've been here for 3 years, are working in unskilled jobs. Let that sink in for a sec. This is supposed to be a skilled migration system, guys, and they're working in unskilled jobs. What does that tell you? And then there's also the Graduate Outcome Survey, which basically came out gets released every year, but it's always a year or two lagged in data. So the 2022 one showed that international student graduates, again, bachelors have been here for several years, earn $8,000 less than local graduates. They also have lower labour force participation. They also have the lower share working in full-time jobs. So this whole notion that we're running this skilled migration program through the student migration channel is an absolute farce. It's skilled in name. If someone comes out of a uni with a spurious degree, well, that's supposedly skilled. But when you actually look at the outcomes are very poor. They're earning, a lot less than local graduates, and they're a lot more of them unemployed, underemployed. And, when you got over half working in unskilled jobs, like level 4 or level 5 jobs, that's absolutely shocking statistic, if you ask me. Anyone who goes to university and does a bachelor degree and comes out and has been here for several years should not be working in an unskilled job. Well, not everyone, but most people, like the overall majority should not be working unskilled jobs. Yet over half working unskilled jobs. And that is an absolute farce.
So it's another symptom of the high population input. A lot of students coming in, a lot of them coming in, frankly, just to get citizenship or the equivalent of residential status rather than actually to train for it. In fact, interesting in the recent Canadian situation, one of the leading politicians over there said, if you look carefully, you've got more Uber drivers who are actually ex-graduates than ever before, and they're all overseas. So it's happening there too.
It sounds like a joke, but it's actually not. So Engineers Australia has released several, they always say it's like, they always put it down to some sort of racism, right? They always say, it's because employers don't employ them. It's like, come on, guys. So basically, 60% of engineers in Australia are foreign born, right? And according to Engineers Australia's own analysis, half of overseas engineers working in Australia, so ones who basically here as migrant engineers, I should say, either underemployed, and they actually use the term driving Ubers, like in jobs like driving Ubers, or unemployed. So what the hell are we doing here? We've got a situation, and the solution is always to bring more. I've got a shortage of engineers, we need to bring in more. It's like, hang on, but half of them aren't working as bloody engineers. Like literally half aren't working as engineers, and they're underemployed, doing jobs, menial jobs like Uber, or unemployed, according to Engineers Australia. So surely the solution is, why, rather than bringing in more, there's obviously the system's broken. And I can use the same examples with accounting as well. Accounting is one of our biggest migrant sources. And even the Grattan Institute admits that accounting is an absolute rot. Same sort of thing. So it's like, well, come on, guys, are we really running a skilled system here? Like, it's skilled in name, but it also ignores the fact that, 40% of the skilled migrant intake, the permanent skilled migrant intake we're talking about here, which dominates the permanent migrant intake. In fact, I've got a chart here on that, just to give you a bit of okay. So this is the permanent migrant intake chart on the right here. So as you can see, it's basically set at about 213,000 by memory. If you include there's like 3,000 Pacific Island. So if you include the humanitarian intake and Pacific Island visas, which are basically permanent, but they don't count as in this intake, but they should. But of that, the skilled migrant intake is about 130,000. Right, this is a red line here. So you think, oh, gee, that's pretty good. That's a skilled system. So 130 out of 213 is skilled. Problem is, 40% of that skilled migrant intake are family members of the skilled migrant, and that's counted as skilled. And most of them are unskilled. So it's like, well, are we really running a skilled migration system? This is the permanent. This is even looking at temporaries, which are mostly through the student migration channel. Yet, so we're always sold this, baloney that Australia is running a skilled migration system when we set, for the temporary migrant intake for a temporary skilled visa, we set the bloody base pay at $70,000, which is $15,000 less than the median full-time wage. So we set a skilled migration pay floor that is well below the median, which includes unskilled workers. We have a intake that's basically 40% family members that are unskilled that are counted as skilled. The whole thing's a farce. Like we pretend to run a skilled migration system, but we don't do it. And it's one of the reasons why productivity sucks. Well, I've got permanent skill shortages here. Like Australia's population has grown by 8.1 million people this century because the Business Council, the Australian Industry Group, Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, lobbied the Howard government in 2002 saying we need to boost immigration because we've got a skills shortage. Well, shit. We've grown the population by about 8 million since then primarily through immigration, so-called skilled, and our skill shortages are worse than ever. It tells you that the whole system's a farce. It's like a perpetual, motion machine where you pretend to solve a problem, you bring in all these people and you make the bloody problem worse. And it's just, so yeah, anyway, so a rant over. There's always a few of these conversations.
Well, without wanting to echo Trump, if you were dictator for a day, right, in Australia, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would change immediately to try and actually reverse the trend or take Australia in a new direction?
Okay. Number one, I'd boot out I'd contact Norway and I'd say, all right, we want your best advisors of how to build a resource rents, taxation system for resources, blah, 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 sovereign wealth fund, whatever. And I'd get them over and I'd let them devise this one. And I'd make that, dictator for a day, because the problem is the next day they just unwind whatever I did. But, so I guess my wish list, right, if I could do it. So number one would be that. So I'd solve, the whole BS that we've got, where we've got basically multinational firms that basically get to pillage us for our resources, and then charge us the global prices on our gas, for example, and electricity, which then forces up electricity. So like, why the hell, with a Saudi Arabia of gas and we're paying bloody, European prices. It's insane. Like you said last time, your energy bill was cheaper in the UK than Australia. Yep. Like, what the actual, you know what? It doesn't make sense. Like, imagine a Saudi Arabian paying $2 a litre to fill up their car. It just doesn't make sense. That's basically what we do with our energy. So I'd do that, number one. Set up a sovereign wealth fund like Norway, so we can actually get the benefit of it, and actually, you know, can cut income tax and all these other inefficient taxes and have more of that. And then you've got more money to spend on social resources, et cetera, because we're taxing, like, you know, our exports of commodities are way higher than Norway's, but they capture theirs. We don't capture ours. And obviously, number two, to go along with that, is I'd cut the hell out of the immigration program for starters, and I'd make sure that it's actually, you know, cut it down to about 100,000 a year. You could cut the family stream from 50 at the moment down to 40, just purely by getting rid of parental visas. So we have this ridiculous system where we grant about 8,000 elderly parent visas a year, which, according to the Productivity Commission, costs Australia over their lifetime, over their remaining life, and they come here, $300,000 cost the taxpayer per visa that's granted. So it's an absolute drain. It ages the population, and it's inequitable, and it's completely ridiculous. Like, there's no magic putting in public finance. So if you're bringing in an elderly person from somewhere under the family, you know, this family scheme, and they're costing taxpayers $300,000 to, you know, over their remaining life, that's money you don't have to spend on schools, hospitals, and everything else. You got to tax everyone more. So I'd get rid of that system, and I'd make the remaining skilled part of it, like, keep the humanitarian the same, whatever. But, you know, I keep the remaining skilled part of it very highly skilled. So none of this $70,000 wage floor thing. You'd set it at about 130, and you make sure it's only the highest skilled people, and you'd focus on areas that Australia actually doesn't have the capability here, rather than just, you know, it's easier for an employer to get that accountant or engineer from overseas and pay them $70K than it is to employ a local one for 90 and have to train them. And then they end up driving Ubers anyway, which is basically the system we've got now. So, yeah, that'd be number two. Number three, broad-based tax reform, you know, broaden the base, lower the rate, lower, you know, the reliance on personal income taxes, all that stuff, make it more efficient, blah, blah, blah. Henry tax review stuff, which kind of segues back into number one. Like, number one's a key component of that. And those are probably the three things I'd do. You know, like property taxes, the whole thing, like just the whole, like basically get the Henry tax review and you know, implement a lot of those recommendations, like most of them. And, you know, but centered around number one, which was tax our resources properly, make sure that domestic residents are looked after, and they're not paying these extreme prices that we're basically getting gouged, and that we actually get a fair return to taxpayers. In the same way Norway does, and then put it away in a sovereign wealth fund. So we've got generational wealth, and basically just copy Norway. So those would be the three things.
And the thing about that, Leith, is those are all actually intensely doable if it wasn't for the political atmosphere that we're actually in, where neither side of politics wants to upset anybody. They don't want to do anything radical. And they're sort of just thinking very short term and thinking about...
And beholden to vested interests.
Yes. And I was going to say, I mean, we had Cameron on some time ago talking about, you know, the game of mates and how that all is part of the problem, because, you know, this is not a pure pay financial or political discussion. It's actually also, there's a dark shadow that, you know, the heavy hand of certain large players who can influence politicians and influence policy much more than individuals.
Yeah, 100%. Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, as I always say, like, you know, the old Donald Thorne quote: Australia's was it lucky country run by, I can't remember the term, like, you know, substandard people or something like that, you know, who share in its luck. So there's some kind of quote like that. It's, you know, it's not wrong. Like, we've got all these natural advantages here, and we're doing our best to completely stuff it up. So, you know, it's the way it goes.
Absolutely. But, you know, it seems to me there's a vision question, and then there's about what is the long-term objective of what we're trying to achieve here, right? Because at the moment, all we're doing is we're swamping Australia with more people, and without putting the infrastructure in place, we're actually making the people already in Australia less affluent over time, not universally, but the bulk of them, and it's making it harder, and the gradient to live and thrive is actually becoming more difficult. We're seeing tent cities and all those things. So I'm just amazed that the political environment is such that everybody just says, "Oh, that's just the way it is," and just moves on. Then talks about the same old again. So we need a different way of thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I do understand why some people just like roll their eyes because they feel helpless. You know what I mean? It's they sort of feel like, oh, look, the system's never going to change. So and look, there is a sometimes I feel jealous of people who are a bit ignorant to all this sort of stuff because they're like, don't have to worry about this stuff because you're not aware of it, so you don't care about it. But when you sort of know how the sausage is made, which you and I do after doing this for so long, it can, like, I've kind of gone through the stages of grief, I guess.
Yeah.
So I used to care more about it. I used to get really angry about it and be like typing like this. Now I sort of accepted it, so I'm more chilled out about it all. But and it's almost become a bit more satirical now, I guess, the way I think about it. Like, this is just a joke. Like, and sometimes I laugh. Like, David and I'm like, can you believe this? SHIT,
yeah.
And it's just, but yeah, it never ceases to amaze you that you think you've hit rock bottom in terms of policy, and then we just go further. Yeah. And I thought we hit rock bottom at 5 years ago. I can't get worse than this. It gets worse. So it's just the way it is. But anyway, what do you do? Like, I'm not, I don't stay up at night, getting stressed about this stuff anymore, or get too angry about it just because, it's not good for your health. So, and plus I'm just getting a little bit more chilled out in my old age.
Well, I mean, I think step one is to highlight the issues and keep highlighting them because, you've done a great job with the migration. Because a couple of years ago, almost nobody was talking about the risks of high migration and how stupid it is. But we've had, people from the Australian, we've had Minak, we've other people now all talk about this stuff quite potently, I think. So I think that's a good point. But I guess the other point here is that, all of this stuff continues to grind, and the cumulative impact on ordinary people are actually pretty negative. You said they're being taken to the cleaners, and I agree, and I'm seeing that in my surveys too. So at some point, something will break, and I guess the question is, will it break in a way that actually then takes us to a better place, or will it break and then they'll just reassert the same old because the same political games will be played? I guess that's the open question.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a bit pessimistic on that one. Like, if the pandemic couldn't, so I'm going back to the migration thing. It's not just that; it's all the other factors as well. But you would have thought when you have effectively a forced 2-year freeze on migration, and you actually have a bit of negative migration for a bit, and all the opinion polls are saying people don't want it to come back, and you've already weaned off the drug, right? It would have been very easy for the federal government just to do a moderate intake coming back. Like, just go back to those historical levels. But instead, they doubled down and they did the Jobs and Skills Summit, and they just basically ramped it up to levels we've never seen before. And it's deliberate. Like, they can say, oh, no, this is all just, catch up, this whole catch up BS. But the fact of the matter is, the Albanese government came in, despite promising to have lower immigration before they got elected. They came in and then immediately they spend this lie of, we've got a 1 million visa backlog. Like, what the hell does that even mean? Yeah. Like, a 1 million visa application sitting there? Well, doesn't mean you got to stamp them all. But his whole thing, we've got to get the visa backlog down. And then, so they've just been, rubber stamping everything. Did the Jobs and Skills Summit where they loosened a whole bunch of stuff. Signed 2 Indian migration deals, which we still don't know the full impact, but they're obviously going to be positive for migration numbers. And a whole bunch of other stuff. They rubber stamped 100,000 pandemic event visas, which were meant to be temporary ones over the pandemic for people who had to stay in Australia or whatever because they couldn't go home. And Labor just basically did another 100,000 after the pandemic was over. They did more than what the coalition did actually during the pandemic. So all this stuff has been deliberate. And, so if the pandemic couldn't kill this, they had an easy way just to not go back to what they did before because they're already weaned off the drug. Instead, they just went and took more drugs than ever in terms of population growth. So, that's why I don't have a lot of faith, because that was our great chance to reset it. reset the system, not just in population, in a whole bunch of areas.
Yep.
And instead, they're just going back to the old model, and they've doubled down on it, just like Jared Minnick said. And we're going to get even worse results. And then we've just generated a rental crisis and a housing crisis. Just on the housing thing quickly, if I don't mind, Martin, basically all the forward-looking indicators on housing are tracking at around decade levels. Now, I've got a chart. I won't bore everyone too much on it, but it shouldn't take that long to find because I think it's number 2 or number 3. Here we go. This one here. So basically, what this chart is, it's got population growth in green. So it's 626,000, I think it was, last financial year. And you got dwelling completion, commencements, approvals, and completions. Completions are way below these two because there's just a whole bunch of unbuilt houses since the pandemic. Like there's heaps in my area, which are built because builders have gone bankrupt, whatever. There's just all these unfinished houses. So, but regardless, all 3 of these indicators are tracking around decade lows, right? Levels we haven't seen for a decade. At the same time, there's another chart I didn't bother putting on here, but trust me, it's at almost an historical low, like record low. And that's loans for new homes. According to the ABS, that's tracking at close to its lowest level in history. So all the forward-looking indicators are basically pointing to, worsening housing construction, housing supply. We only added 170,000 homes in 2022-23, or in year to September, against a population increase of 626,000, right? So we didn't build enough, clearly. And all the forward-looking indicators are suggesting it's going to get even worse. And most of that, whether it's Oxford Economics, Housing Industry Association, Master Builders, they all think we're going to have even worse construction this year than we had last year. At the same time as the population is growing like a science experiment. And, the Albanese government came out and said, we're going to build 1.2 million homes over 5 years, 240,000 homes a year. We've never built over 223,000 in a single year ever. And that was during, when we did that was in about 2017 when we had the massive high-rise construction disaster centred on Sydney and Melbourne, where we've had all these flammable cladding, cracking buildings, balcony leaks, foundation problems, etc. Opal Towers, Mascot, a whole bunch of other ones. Costing owners tons of money. You've had to evacuate residents. The building commissioner came out last week and said over half of all the apartments that were built between 2016 and 2022 have serious defects in them. And this brainiac of a federal government that Prime Minister we've got has said, you know what? There was such a success last decade when we built all these crappy apartments. How about we ramp immigration higher than ever, population growth higher than ever? We'll set a BS housing target that won't be met anyway. But if it does get met, it's going to be met by high-rise apartments because we're telling everyone they've got to live in high-rise now. And we're going to repeat the same building disaster that happened at the second half of last decade, when over 5 years we built more apartments we never built before, and they're all terrible quality. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, you can't have quantity and quality at the same time. It doesn't work, right? But this idiot of a Prime Minister we've got, who's decided to run a biggest migration program ever, basically means we have to build as many houses as we can as quickly as possible to try and meet that construction need. We won't do it because we can't possibly build that many, but he wants to try. And all it means is we're going to just build with all these crappy high-rise apartments again, which are going to be very poorly built because we've had to build them so quickly, and just slap them up quickly we need apartments, we need housing quick, guys. Just build something. It's going to be really poor quality. And we're going to basically repeat the same garbage that we did last decade, where we had, just faulty apartments, really poorly built, overpriced, etc. And it still won't keep up the population growth they want to bring in. So it's just, it's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for falling living standards. It's complete BS. And that's what they're doing to us.
Mm. Absolutely. Jason, thanks for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I agree, Leith. And the problem is, of course, that the compounding effects of all these bad policies over year after year get worse and worse and worse. So that's one of the reasons why housing affordability is completely shot, why, in fact, productivity is falling through the floor. And, the economic consequences of that also build and build and build. So it gets harder and harder and harder to come out of the nosedive. You just keep on doing the same thing because that's all you can do. And that seems to me where we are. Both sides of politics pretty much singing from the same hymn sheet. So it's not a sunny outlook, unfortunately. And, you know, some of those externalities, as we discovered earlier on, you know, potentially might have an impact too. So economically, I think, you know, whether there's a recession formally or not, actually, many households actually are behaving like there's a recession, and that's not going to change.
Yeah, and one of the problems also, Martin, is that because this malarkey has been going on for nearly 20 years, most young people, younger people, I'm 46, right? So I remember how it was before. You know, and you know, you're old enough to remember as well, and other people. But if you're fairly young, right? If you're, I don't know, 30 or whatever, all you've known during your adult life, or your, you know, even if you're 40, you probably, you know, well, you're sort of in that situation. But, well, 35-year-old, for example, all you've known is big migration, right? So you think this is normal because that's all you've had your whole life.
Yep.
And the problem with that is it then creates this perception that it's normal amongst the electorate, and so they don't think it's bad what we're doing because that's all they've ever known. Whereas you and I are old enough to have seen what it was like beforehand when it was a lot better. But then you just, you know, then you're just a racist dinosaur. So that's basically, you know, oh, you're just a, you know, just a middle-aged white man, you know, blah blah blah, you know, sort of crap. So, but yeah, it's just crazy. So they've sort of boiled the frog over 20 years, and then, you know, the frogs don't know that they've been boiled and they think that that's normal.
Yeah.
Whereas I was just like, what the hell are we doing? Like, we used to be like this, and now it's this. You know, I remember when in the 90s, when I was driving my car around in the mid-90s, you know, on P's and stuff, there was not much traffic in Melbourne. It was really, you know, it was cruisy. You go out, it was cheap. Houses were cheap, all this stuff. Unfortunately, I was too young to buy one at that time. But, you know, when you, but I remember it was really cheap. And, you know, cost of living was great. And Sydney would have been, you know, I always thought, oh, gee, Sydney's expensive compared to Melbourne. But comparative to what it is now, you know, Sydney around the Olympics time and before was a dream compared to what it is now on all measures. And you know, you and I remember that because we were there when that's what it was. But the younger generation today, all they've known is the way it is now. So it's easier for politicians to gaslight them on it because they don't know any different. It's quite a shame.
Yeah, and I would also say that the quality of the politicians we've got are degraded significantly over time as well. So they seem less able and interested to tackle some of the critical issues.
Well, and one thing on that. I don't know if you ever heard the Sunscreen song. It's on from Romeo and Juliet soundtrack in '98. Everyone's free to wear sunscreen. So it's about this old guy who's dispelling wisdom to a young person, right? So I played it for my daughter who's 13, and I hadn't heard it for, I don't know, 20, 30 years almost. And it still holds up today. So everyone type it in your play, everybody's free to wear sunscreen. Fantastic. But there's this sign, there's this sentence where the old guy goes, you know, accept some inalienable truths. Prices will rise. Politicians will philander. You too will get old. When you get old, you will fantasize about times when politicians were noble, prices were reasonable, and young people respected their elders. And I'm like, that's me now, actually. Hang on. Is this nostalgia? Like, am I looking back in the past going, it was great because it's nostalgia, or was it actually great? But you know, because I'm always like, man, Melbourne was great in the 90s. I'm like that all the time. But it actually was really cheap. And it was like cost of living was good. You could get a house very cheap. You could live on one income still back then. Like that is objectively, you know, that was objectively what it is. I don't think that's just nostalgia. But having listened to that song, listened to it about over the weekend actually when I drove to a camping trip with my daughter, and I was just like, that actually did stick to me. Hang on, am I being that old guy? Like fantasizing about the past just because I'm getting old, you know? But you know, that's just a little funny anecdote.
Well, but the point there is, it isn't just that. It is actually the data shows it, right? And all the charts that you've been walking through this evening, and I share regularly, you know, the data doesn't lie, and you know, that's the real critical point, right? That clearly, you know, perceptions change over time, yes, but things are not going in the right direction. And, you know, I think that's the point. And that's why these conversations are so critical, because it really does. It's data informed. And, you know, that's one of the things that I specialize on here on the channel, and you do through MacroBusiness, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, if people want to find more about what you think and what you do, where's the best place for them to go these days?
So it's still macrobusiness.com.au, but I have got to warn you, I've become a bit of a media tart. So basically, I I seem to get a lot of requests these days. So I did ABC Radio on Australia. I'm doing. I was actually supposed to do Sky News tonight, and I said, "Sorry, I'm doing Martin North." So there you go. I'm doing. Yeah, that's all right. No, they want me to get on every Tuesday night now. So I've said yes, but when you want me, I'll just say no on that weekend. But that week. But I'm doing Ben Fordham, 2GB Sydney live tomorrow at about 8 something a.m. So that'll be fun. I'm doing a lot of that stuff. But basically, if you want to listen to my media interviews, I've got a YouTube channel, nothing like this. All it is, it's just my central hub of where I basically upload all my media interviews, because effectively I do all these ones everywhere all over the place, and people can't find them because they're often buried in like a show podcast or whatever. And also often they then delete those, so they're lost to history. So what I do is I just basically upload them to that. And that's at my YouTube channel is at Leith Vo, Leithvo. Surprisingly, I'm almost up at 1,600 subscribers, which is 1,550 or something, which is like taking me by surprise, because I'm not really. All I do is just put up interviews. That's all I do. But anyway, that's if you want to stay tuned to all my media stuff, I do. That's where it goes. And that's pretty much it. MacroBusiness.com.au and at Leithvo on YouTube. I do have the same handle on Twitter, but I do not post on Twitter. I think it's a cesspit. My last post on there probably was 6-7 years ago, where I argued with someone. So now I just use Twitter purely as to follow Tarek and Justin Fabo and Alex Joyner and other people I respect. So that's that.
Well, Leith, I appreciate your time and your thoughts as always. Very penetrating and very important. And we'll put some links and things below for people to go look at the the shows you've been on. As I say, the pro media chart now. So I'm very grateful you're able to find time to come on DFA. You might be interested to know, I did my first ABC TV interview in 1997.
Wow.
And I actually started accumulating those shows and then put them on YouTube, and that's how DFA started. So you don't know where you're going to end up.
That's it. Well, I mean, the whole thing is I've got this weakness where I always just say yes, right? So I sort of said, start of last year, I kind of made the decision. I said, sorry to keep this going, but I sort of said this. So look, I'm just going to say yes to almost everything. I mean, if you can do it, right? So if you do that, just see where it takes me. And you say yes, and then they, thanks, Drew. If you say yes, then they obviously go, oh, this guy's pretty approachable, and ask you again and again. And then before you know it, I'm on, 2GB radio, got Treasury Common Sense. My business partner Dave does that as well every week. And then you got this, and I'm on a Saturday morning one here. And now I've actually broken into the ABC finally, which is great, because it's always been, Sky, 2GB, 4BC, 3AW in Melbourne, all the, so-called right-wing nut jobs. As the lefties like to call it. But I actually find those people pretty reasonable. They've always been incredibly nice to me and treated me very well. But I finally got on ABC Radio on Australia, and I did a 13-minute interview with them. It was fantastic. And they were really good. So hopefully ABC will be, will actually get me on rather than just snubbing me.
Well, I hope so. I certainly still do stuff on ABC even from here. So, they still they got a long Cardex of people, and they seem to.
I'm the immigration guy. They don't like to talk about it. So because of that, it's like I'm, I've been tarred, with that. So, but I actually talked about that for 13 minutes on Australia Day with. On ABC Radio. It was fantastic. I'm like, wow, they're really, and it was a really good discussion. It could have been 2GB, 2GB. It wouldn't have made it. Look, you wouldn't have known the difference. They were really good.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Leith, I want to say thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And as always, plenty of things to talk about. We'll get you back on down the track again. If you can shake your way off on Sky on that would be great. And there'll be so much information coming over the next few months, of course, with all of the data. So we'll keep tracking that. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to take you offline. I'm going to close the show. See you later.
Cheers. Thanks, Barn. Thanks, everyone.
There you go, folks. Hope you enjoyed that very important conversation with Leith there, and these critical issues we'll continue to press. Next week, Damon Classen's back to talk about the markets and what's happened over the last month or so. So that'll be interesting. So check out that live show. And in the meantime, of course, I'll be making the occasional recorded show in the meantime. And the doggies are still here. They've hardly moved the whole of the time. So that was quite good. So I'll take that for another walk quite soon. Anyway, thank you very much. Have a great evening and look forward to seeing you on the next show. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics signing off. Cheerio.